Welcome back to another deep dive. Usually when we talk about this whole concept of hope, especially around the springtime, it's painted in these very soft, forgiving pastels.
Right, it's all very light.
Exactly. It's all fresh starts, blooming flowers, chirping birds, and empty tombs bathed in morning light.
Hmm.
Culturally, we tend to really sanitize
Oh,
hope.
for sure. We make it breezy.
Yeah, breezy and frankly a little fragile. But what happens when the landscape isn't some nice spring garden? Like, what happens when the landscape is completely scorched earth?
That is a much harder question.
It really is. What does hope look like? And more importantly, what does it sound like when absolutely everything in your life goes wrong?
And that's exactly what we're getting into today.
Yes, today our mission is to explore that exact question using a really powerful passage from a 50-day devotional. It's called Living Hope. From the Empty Tomb to Pentecost Fire, and it's by Pastor Rob Bailey.
But we aren't going to summarize the whole book. We're actually bypassing the broader overview to zoom directly in on one incredibly striking entry.
Which is day 7, right?
Yeah, day 7 is titled Skin and Dust and Sight. And it centers on a passage written about ancient, unimaginable suffering, specifically from the biblical book of Job.
Right.
The core mission here is to really look at the mechanics of that ancient suffering and understand how the author uses it as a literal shortcut for finding resilience today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we all know the basic cultural shorthand for the story of Job, right? Like, he's the guy who loses everything.
Literally everything.
Yeah, his wealth evaporates, his family is killed, his health is completely destroyed. He is left sitting in a pile of ashes, literally scraping his own sores.
It's incredibly bleak.
And his friends are just offering this terrible, condemning advice. But the devotional isolates one specific sentence Job says from the absolute bottom of that pit, from Job chapter 19.
Right.
Out of nowhere, Job just declares, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth."
What's fascinating here is that this line, it does not rise from pleasant circumstances.
Right.
At all.
No, not even a little bit.
Bailey points out that Job is sitting in sheer misery. I mean, his body is failing. His losses are described as crushing. And his friends are offering what the text calls poor comfort.
Poor comfort is almost an understatement.
Right, because when you are socially isolated and physically in agony, the natural human default is total despair.
Yeah, you just give up.
Exactly. The psychological weight of that poor comfort alone is devastating. It's that feeling of being totally misunderstood by the very people who are supposed to be your safety net.
Wow, yeah.
And yet, out of that profound isolation, out of the ash heap, Job delivers what the author calls one of the strongest resurrection sentences in all of Scripture.
Which completely flips the script on how we typically process grief today. Like, planting that statement right there is like planting a flag in the middle of a war zone.
That's a great way to put it.
Because this isn't some ancient version of toxic positivity. Job isn't sitting in the ashes, forcing a smile and saying, well, everything happens for a reason.
Good vibes only.
Right. Good vibes only. Toxic positivity fundamentally requires you to, deny the reality of your pain. But Job is fully acknowledging his ruined skin and his fresh grief.
He's not hiding from it.
No. His statement functions as an absolute protest against despair.
And if you look at the mechanics of that protest, it's deeply physical. The text explicitly notes that Job looks past his ruined skin toward a living Redeemer who will stand at the last.
Stand upon the earth, yeah.
And that he expects to actually see God, like physically see him. We have to understand the historical shock of that claim.
What do you mean?
Well, in much of the ancient Near Eastern world, the afterlife was viewed as Sheol. It was this shadowy, disembodied underworld where the dead just sort of faded away into echoes.
Just ghosts, basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
So to sit there with your physical body literally decaying and rotting off your bones, and to boldly claim a future physical vindication where a Redeemer stands on the earth,
That is wild.
it's a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Job is stating that death does not have the authority to cancel that ultimate meeting.
But wait, does that actually work for a modern listener? I have to push back here on the structural choice the author made.
Okay, go ahead.
If I'm reading an Easter devotional and the subtitle is literally From the Empty Tomb to Pentecost Fire,
Yep.
I'm showing up for the joy of the resurrection, right?
Sure.
According to the text, the first 6 days of this book are focused on John chapter 20. That's the morning of the resurrection. It's all running feet, empty grave cloths, startled hearts.
Very fast-paced.
Exactly. It's fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled joy. So bringing in a guy scraping his boils in an ash heap feels like terrible tonal whiplash.
It does seem like a weird fit at first glance.
Right. Doesn't dropping ancient, miserable Job into the middle of a springtime Easter narrative just drag the reader down? Why
Mhm.
construct a book about hope this way?
Well, it does feel like a jarring edit on the surface,
Mhm.
but there's a highly specific structural causality at play here.
Okay.
Think about the psychological state of those disciples in John 20. They are experiencing the empty tomb as a massive shock.
Yeah, they didn't expect it.
Mary Magdalene's weeping, Peter and John are sprinting to the grave, everyone is confused. It's panic, adrenaline, and this sudden startling realization.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if your theological concept of hope is solely based on a sudden startled reaction, it can feel like a sudden plot twist.
Oh, I see.
And plot twists, while exciting, they can feel flimsy or improvised.
Like God was just making it up on the fly.
Exactly. So Bailey brings Job in at the end of that first week to provide a foundation. He uses this incredible phrase stating that Job adds ancient thunder to Easter faith.
Ancient thunder, I love that. So it builds a historical load-bearing wall for the empty tomb.
Yes.
It takes this fleeting, chaotic adrenaline spike of Easter morning and anchors it to something incredibly heavy. The startled joy of the disciples is the lightning flash, but Job provides the deep, low-frequency rumble of thunder that proves the storm has been brewing for a very long time.
That's the exact mechanism. The text explains that long before the women ever came to the garden tomb, the people of God were already being taught to look for one who lives.
One who will stand victorious in the end.
Right. By connecting Job's ancient ash heap to the disciples' empty tomb, the author demonstrates that God's plan for redemption wasn't a certain improvisation to fix a mistake.
It was always the plan.
It was an ancient, rooted promise finally coming to fruition. You really cannot structurally support the immense joy of the resurrection without the foundational weight of that ancient suffering.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the author doesn't just leave that ancient thunder as an abstract historical idea.
No, he brings it right into the present.
Right. The devotional makes a hard pivot, pulling this ancient prophecy into concrete reality for the listener. The text argues that in Christ, Job's abstract hope suddenly receives a name and a face.
Yes, the Redeemer is no longer a vague wish.
Exactly. He is the historical Jesus, crucified and risen. And because of that specific reality, the author unleashes this profound cascade of statements in the text.
Those statements are so powerful.
They really are. They completely reframe how we interact with the physical world. He writes 3 specific states because he lives statements.
Let's hear them.
He says, because he lives, the body matters. Because he lives, dust is not final. Because he lives, sorrow does not get to rename reality.
Those 3 sentences are dense with philosophical implications that directly challenge how we live today. Let's break them down sequentially.
Okay, let's do it.
Starting with the assertion that the body matters. For centuries, influenced heavily by ancient Greek philosophy like Platonism, and even in modern wellness circles, there has been this pervasive dualism.
Where the body is bad and the spirit is good.
Essentially, yeah. The idea is that the physical body is just a temporary, flawed shell, a prison for the soul, and the ultimate goal is to escape it and become purely spiritual.
Right, the whole we are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience mindset. It treats the physical body as something ultimately disposable.
But the text is arguing that the bodily resurrection of Jesus completely shatters that dualism. Well, if the Redeemer rose physically, and if Job expects to see God in his physical flesh, then the material world, including our physical bodies, with all their vulnerabilities, aches, pains, and eventual decline, it has profound eternal value.
So Job's ruined skin isn't just organic trash to be discarded.
Exactly. The theological promise is that physical bodies are inherently valuable and ultimately redeemed. It validates physical existence.
And because he's establishing that the physical body matters, he naturally has to address the reality of what happens when that body inevitably breaks down. Which brings us directly to the concept of dust.
Your second statement.
Right. Because he lives, dust is not final. Dust is the ultimate symbol of entropy. It's the second law of thermodynamics in action.
Everything breaks down.
Exactly. Everything in the universe eventually breaks down, cools off, and decays into dust. From dust you are and to dust you will return is the starkest reminder of human mortality. But this text treats dust fundamentally differently.
It reclassifies it. If the empty tomb is a historical reality, as the devotional asserts, then dust is no longer the permanent end state of human entropy. It becomes a temporary state.
A waiting room.
Yes. The author is framing the grave not as a final destination, but as a waiting room. The entropy of the physical universe is real, but it is superseded by the reality of a living Redeemer who reverses that decay.
Which flows right into the third, and frankly the most psychologically complex statement for anyone currently in the middle of a hard time.
Which is,
Because he lives, sorrow does not get to rename reality.
that is such a crucial point.
It really is, because grief creates an intense cognitive bias. When you are standing in the blast radius of a terrible loss, your brain literally acts as a filter where it only registers what is broken.
That's so true.
Sorrow acts like a totalitarian regime. It wants to dictate your past, your present, and your future. It asserts itself as the only true thing in the universe.
And that is why the phrasing rename reality is so precise. When you are on the ash heap, like Job, sorrow tries to dictate the terms of your entire existence.
It tries to tell you who you are.
Exactly. It tries to rename your identity from a person experiencing loss to a person who is the loss. But the devotional is drawing a hard line.
Yeah, it acknowledges that the sorrow is real, the pain is agonizing.
But it strips sorrow of its authority to define ultimate truth. The living Redeemer is presented as the ultimate reality.
And this leads to an incredible definition of what living hope actually is. The text notes that living hope can sound fragile in the mouth, but it is stronger than the grave beneath the feet.
That imagery is so vivid.
Think about the acoustics of a hospital waiting room or a graveside service. When someone whispers that they have hope in those environments, it sounds incredibly thin.
Like it could just break.
Exactly, like a delicate glass ornament that the slightest bit of bad news could shatter. But the author is arguing that while it might sound fragile on the audio track, structurally, it is bearing the weight of the world.
It's the difference between the appearance of strength and actual structural integrity. And to maintain that integrity, the author makes a crucial distinction that acts as a guardrail for the reader's mental health. The devotional explicitly states, the Christian confession is not that pain is small, it is that the Redeemer is alive.
Wow. That one distinction prevents faith from devolving into delusion.
It really does.
If the confession was that pain is small, you would have to spend your entire life minimizing your own suffering just to prove you had enough faith. You'd have to look at your ruined health or your lost loved ones and pretend it wasn't a big deal.
Which is incredibly damaging.
But the text completely validates the sheer horror of human suffering. It allows the pain to be massive, but it insists that the living Redeemer is simply larger.
It creates a theological framework where you can look the absolute worst parts of human existence right in the eye, fully acknowledge their devastation, and still stubbornly declare that the Redeemer lives.
It's a framework that refuses to compromise on either the reality of the dark or the reality of the light.
Perfectly said.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, when you wake up tomorrow? Because theology means very little if it can't be applied, right?
Oh, absolutely. If it doesn't help you on a Tuesday morning, what's the point?
Exactly. It has to help with a panic attack or the crushing weight of grief on a lonely Friday night. Bailey knows this, which is why the entry moves directly from this high-level theological climax into a deeply practical tool.
Yes. At the end of day 7, there's a specific actionable next step provided for the day.
What does he suggest?
The text advises the reader to take Job's ancient confession. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and repeat it several times throughout the day, specifically in moments, as the author beautifully puts it, when loss feels loud.
When loss feels loud. Man, anyone who has ever grieved knows exactly what that acoustic shift feels like.
It's so sudden.
There are days when loss is just a quiet, manageable hum in the background of your life, like a refrigerator running. And then there are moments where it suddenly becomes deafening.
It drowns out everything else.
It drowns out every other thought in your head. Your heart races, cortisol floods your system, and you just start spiraling. When you're actually in that state of panic, what do you literally do?
That's where this tool comes in.
Right. The text suggests a specific cognitive interrupt. Repeating this ancient verse isn't a magic spell that makes the storm of grief suddenly disappear. It acts as an anchor.
Holding a ship steady in rough waters.
Exactly. The anchor doesn't stop the storm, but it stops you from drifting out to sea when the waves of grief hit. Repeating this verse keeps your mind anchored to the reality of the Redeemer so you don't capsize into total despair.
And this raises an important question about how we handle our own grief. Because that psychological anchoring is reinforced by the prayer included at the end of the devotion.
Oh, the prayer is so good.
The author asks God to anchor the reader in holy defiance. And then he writes this incredibly muscular line, where grief presses hard, let resurrection hope press harder.
I cannot overstate how much I love that imagery. It frames hope not as a passive feeling of optimism that just magically washes over you when you are sad, but as a competitive, active resistance.
It's exertion.
When grief pushes against your chest, hope has to push back with greater force.
It requires immense discipline. The text is framing hope as a deliberate confession. It's a refusal to yield the territory of your mind to that totalitarian regime of sorrow we talked about earlier.
Right.
And the entry closes with a blessing that pulls all these concepts together, praying that the reader be comforted by the living Redeemer who will not abandon dust to the grave.
It takes the ancient thunder of Job, the startled joy of the empty tomb, and the harsh reality of modern human entropy, and resolves them all in the promise of physical, ultimate redemption.
It's a fascinating architectural feat of writing, really,
Mm.
because it entirely validates the ash heap while pointing relentlessly toward the empty tomb,
It gives you absolute permission to mourn your losses.
while simultaneously demanding that you maintain the courage to hope.
Which is exactly why the author placed it at the end of week 1. You have to understand the depth of the valley to understand the height of the resurrection.
The startling joy of Easter only has structural integrity because it is built on the profound, tested endurance of the ash heap.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly summarize the journey we've taken you on today. We started by dismantling the idea of pastel, fragile hope.
We looked at Job sitting in total devastation.
His skin ruined, his social safety net gone, and we saw how his refusal to surrender to despair birthed a defiant confession of physical resurrection.
We saw how that confession wasn't just an isolated historical anomaly. It provided the necessary ancient thunder to ground the frantic, adrenaline-fueled joy of the Easter narrative.
Proving that God's redemptive plan wasn't a sudden plot twist, but a deeply rooted reality.
We explored how that reality fundamentally changes the mechanics of our everyday lives, proving that the physical body inherently matters, that the entropy of dust is just a temporary waiting room.
And most importantly, that the cognitive bias of sorrow does not have the ultimate authority to rename our reality.
And finally, we looked at the literal practical application of all this, the call to utilize holy defiance as an anchor, the practice of actively, muscularly pushing back with resurrection hope when the crushing weight of loss feels too loud to bear.
It brings us right back to the central question we asked at the beginning. What does hope sound like when absolutely everything goes wrong?
It doesn't sound like chirping birds.
No, it sounds like ancient thunder. It sounds like a fierce, stubborn refusal to let the dark have the final word. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your reality today.
Something to really think about.
What if your absolute deepest moments of grief, panic, and loss are actually the exact arenas where your hope has the opportunity to be the most defiant? How might treating your hope not as a fragile glass ornament you have to protect, but as a muscular, active rebellion against despair completely change the way you face whatever is coming tomorrow? Think about that.